right. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everyone who is here. I'm excited to give this presentation. Again, my name is Deb Hilbert. I am currently with the University of Florida, and I am going to be starting with the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in August. I also am a consulting arborist and urban forester, and I think someone's going to share some of the links to my different affiliations. Today, I am going to give an overview of a model of the urban tree supply chain. I'm also going to summarize some research that has been done on urban tree production, selection, and procurement, and then outline some of the takeaway challenges and solutions to expanding the urban tree supply. So to start, I want to help provide a basic understanding of the urban tree supply chain. Here's a very basic overview of the process of how a tree species goes from being in the wild to being trialed, propagated, selected and sold, and then ultimately planted into the urban environment. At each of these stages of the supply chain, there are unique processes and different professionals who are involved, and along the way, the amount of trees available, both the species and the quantity, shrinks or gets squeezed so that the amount we have in the urban area is ultimately a lot less than what is available on a global scale. And this is due to biological, environmental, and then human factors. The beginning of the supply chain starts with seed propagation and propagule collection by horticulturalists, researchers, and technicians like this Forest Service seed collector. And then the next step involves the trialing of trees to find out which ones are easily produced and marketable. And this is where the growers are the experts. The next step involves the process of creating urban spaces for trees, and this can be done indirectly through policy making, development, urban planning, or it can be done directly through landscape design. This is where folks like landscape architects and landscape professionals are making a lot of the decisions. This is also where a lot of the quantity and types of species gets greatly limited due to urban site constraints. And then finally comes the actual planting of the trees by residents, arborists, urban foresters, community groups, contractors, etc. These steps in the supply chain are not totally linear, and some of the key players in one step are also involved in different steps. But what is so interesting about this supply chain is really it's the people who make it so interesting and also make it so complicated. My colleagues and I try to make the system a little less complicated and more understandable by conducting research on how tree selection, production, and purchasing work together to shape the resulting urban forest. So I'm going to really briefly explain some of the research that we've done and what it tells us about tree availability for urban use. So the good news is there is more and more recognition of how beneficial trees are. So there is an interest in planting large swaths of forest to mitigate climate change, for example. But some recent research by another group has shown that the current tree production capacity is not sufficient to supply reforestation of open spaces. So basically what they found is if we wanted to plant forest on reclaimed farmlands, degraded forest, and other plantable rural spaces, we do not have nearly enough trees. Similarly, there has been an increase in large-scale urban tree planting initiatives, which many of you are involved in. And anecdotally, we know that we have supply chain issues for the urban sector as well. But the urban tree supply chain has its own unique challenges in comparison to that of traditional reforestation efforts. So we need to better understand what these unique aspects are to the urban tree supply chain. And what I have found is a great way to do this is to interview the folks who are involved in this process. And so that's exactly what my colleagues and I have done. We've conducted focus groups and interviews of the key players in several studies across the US, and I'm going to summarize some of the applicable findings. So first off, when we ask growers what factors they have to consider when deciding which trees to grow and how many, they share that the tree's suitability to their climate and their farm, as well as the prior success of that tree, is important. Market demand is extremely important. So what do their clients want and what has been historically successful on the market? And a lot of times this is driven by large-scale purchasers like large development firms. The availability of the tree as a liner is a deciding factor. Not all nurseries are starting their trees from seeds or cuttings. Many of them will purchase the liners from other much larger farms. But ultimately, it comes down to maximizing production and minimizing expenses and risks, because nurseries are very risky businesses, and so they will need to reduce the risk as much as possible to keep their business going. When we have asked the purchasers of trees, like arborists, landscape architects, urban forestry groups, what they have to consider when deciding which trees to grow, they have shared the suitability of the tree to the site. So what is its function in the landscape, and is it going to be successful in that planting location? Is it native or is it invasive? How much maintenance does it require? Is it even available? And that is a pinch point. So not only is the species or cultivar available, but is it available in the quality, size, or the stock type that is desired? Climate change is a consideration, as well as cost and any local tree planting regulations. We've also asked growers to share what they think are the challenges in the urban tree supply chain, and they have shared that a lack of commercial demand for very urban specific trees can be an issue. Again, availability of liners and seeds, climatic events, so natural disasters or even just extreme weather that affects their inventory on their farm. An overall loss of nurseries and loss of growers is a major issue across the US. We just have less and less tree nurseries. It's also expensive and logistically challenging to transport trees into some very dense urban areas. And then there is a mismatch in the cycle of grant-funded planting projects versus the actual growth of a tree and the annual or seasonal cycles within a nursery itself. So trees can take anywhere from 3 to 10 years to grow from a seed or propagule to a size that's appropriate for an urban planting. And oftentimes that doesn't match up with grant-funded planting projects. And similarly, within nurseries, there are seasonal timelines for when they dig trees and when the trees are going to be ready to be sold. So we'll hear more about that later on, but this can be a sticking point. When we have asked our consumers of urban trees what they think are some challenges in this supply chain, they have shared sometimes they want larger trees, sometimes they want smaller trees, depending on the region they're from. They want higher quality stock to meet rigorous urban tree planting standards. They also are very specific about the types of trees they want. There's a demand for trees that are smaller at maturity to fit into some of these dense urban sites or under utility lines. There's a need for a more diverse palette, both genetically as well as just species or taxa-wise. And then a need for more native species. Again, that mismatched timing of grants versus the biological cycles of trees is an issue, pest diseases and challenging urban site conditions, and a lack of knowledge regarding the logistics of purchasing and planting, which hopefully will clear some of that up for you today. And then there is a experience with some urban forest professionals that they feel like they don't have a large ability to shape the market when they're going against the pressures of things like large development firms. But again, after today, hopefully you'll feel a little more confident about being able to get the trees that you need. All right, and then when we ask professionals what they think are the opportunities to increase tree supply for urban use, they shared many things, but I'm going to focus in on the ones that really apply to our talks today. And they all revolve around communication and relationships between growers and purchasers. So becoming familiar with nursery directories, databases, and typical inventory is a really important first step. And then engaging in contract growing, including with state nurseries as a supplement, is another solution, which we'll talk about. Attending professional nursery and landscape conferences and meetings. So if you are someone who's looking to start purchasing trees and you want to form a relationship with growers and you have no idea where to start, look to attend a local landscape professional meeting where you can actually meet some of the local growers and talk to them about what you want and what projects you have coming up. Be very specific about the tree quality, structure, and other requirements that you need, and then plan ahead as much as possible with nursery cycles in mind. All right, so I'm going to briefly go over 2 strategies that can help you get the trees that you need for your urban plantings. The first one is contract growing. So when you need certain trees and those needs are not being met, you can work directly with growers to communicate the trees that you want. These are not always formalized by signed contracts. Some are just verbal contracts, but no matter what, it comes down to sustained, strong working relationships with growers. It takes risk off the growers, which is a big bonus of this system. It also ensures that what you need, not only the species, but the types, quantities, and other specifications are available. You can look to other contract growing models from different locations to try to initiate similar arrangements, and we're going to hear some specific examples from our next 2 presenters on this. Another option, and this is an additional strategy, not an alternative, is to create an in-house nursery. So the first step should always be talking to the professional horticulturalists, those growers, and see if they have what you want or if they can grow it. If not, you may find that there are still some species you want and can't get from a commercial nursery. It might be slow growing, or you have really specific requirements about where the seeds are collected or the genetic stock. So you may be able to create an in-house nursery. This is also helpful because you can purchase desirable trees when they're available from different nurseries and then stage them in your own in-house nursery until you're ready to plant them out for your project. You can also grow out your own seeds that you collect or partners collect, and you can leverage your resources like your space, your funding, etc., by partnering with local environmental groups, extension agencies, or government agencies like the Forest Service. There are tons of examples of this. It's usually most successful in municipalities where they have a long-term planting plan, they know which species they're going to want consistently, and they have the space to create a staging nursery. But even if you decide to do this, you're going to need advice from the professional growers, and so no matter what, you need to talk to your nursery. Growing choices are largely defined by what can be grown well and what sells. So tell the growers what you want. And if you have repeat bids and continuous communication, over time you can create a reliable supply of trees for your project. With that, I'm going to hand it over to James Ketchell, who's going to talk more specifically about his experience and advice regarding contract growing and projects.